Hi, yes, Mwenya, welcome to What AI Means for Us. Great to have you on today. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris. Yeah, delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So yes, we've been chatting for a while, and yeah, your background is in the operations strategy piece, and yeah, you've been a chief of staff for a while in two well-known startups in the UK, and just someone I've grown to admire in the industry and recruited roles, chief staff roles in the past, and I can certainly put you up there in the top echelon, I guess. So, yeah, do you want to just start by introducing your career up to I guess, the present day and how you got into to be a chief of staff, I guess?
Yeah, so I definitely had what many would describe as a really varied path. So I have a liberal arts degree, as they'd say in the US. So I studied history at Oxford, and then essentially actually moved to New York to intern at Bill Clinton's foundation. Focused on researching issues such as climate change, education. And then took a very circuitous route and ended up moving into the private sector and working at Accenture in what was at the time called their business strategy team. So that was working with, I mean, I think in my case, about 30 or so different clients across all sorts of sectors, all sorts of strategy disciplines, all sorts of work around essentially, what's an innovation strategy in a large organization. And I was looking at so many different types of emerging technology. I became really interested in going deep with one of them. So at the time,
Mm.
I was picking between blockchain and AI.
Yeah,
And I ended up going down the AI route. I had a former colleague from Accenture who I admired a lot, who joined a startup and was working on basically how to use AI to detect terrorist propaganda
mm,
for counterterrorism purposes. So I thought, wow, they're working on some really, really massive challenges. And it wasn't so much about wanting to be in the counterterrorism space. It was more the size of the ambition, the way they were applying AI that really inspired me to get into the field. So I started out actually leading technical delivery teams who would deliver bespoke AI solutions for different clients, whether they were government departments or private sector organizations, and then really went into focusing on how AI can address the sort of harmful con- how AI can address the harmful content and conduct that there is online to make online spaces safer for us all, but critically still enabling people to be creative, have freedom of expression, etc. All those things that we would want in a liberal democracy. So, and essentially, I was working very much with a lot of different clients. COVID was really interesting, and I got some really great, really big opportunities around the strategy and operation side. So I was doing that and a lot of client work at the same time. So eventually went into a business operations role. So again, kind of getting into the chief of staff type work. And then, yeah, I got my first chief of staff role, yeah, at Logically, which was the second startup that I worked at.
nice. And I think to me, your career kind of seems quite purposeful in terms of the companies that you've chosen. I guess is kind of a responsible tint there. What drew you to the ethics and strategy piece, especially coming from somewhere like Accenture, where you've got exposure to lots of different projects, etc., and you could have taken your career in lots of different directions. I guess what was the draw for you?
Yeah, so I really love the strategic disciplines because it's about making really big decisions for a company or facilitating a company to make big decisions about how it's going to operate in a particular market. I like the fast growing big markets such as AI. And really the ethics piece, which again, we can define ethics in many, many different ways. But for me, it's about the values and the principles that you apply to ensure that in this case, the technology that you're developing is responsible and it works for businesses, it works for the customers, it works for society, etc. So to me, there's no reason for that to contradict. So what really has drawn me to the companies that I've worked at is this massive scale of ambition and the level of impact that they want to have, that I feel is positive on our day-to-day lives and also the way we work.
Yeah, interesting. I think today we're gonna kind of cover some of that off around your strategy and operations, experience, responsible development, and also, I guess you've got the battle scars of raising funding in the UK, which not many people can say. But I think a big focus today is, going to be on startups and founders and how your experience could potentially benefit those types of people. But, yeah, I mean, I'll, be honest, when I first recruited a, chief of staff, last year, it was hard to define what a what is actually the definition, what should you look for, and what is a chief of staff to you? How what does a good chief of staff do?
This is a great question for so many different reasons. Really, a chief of staff has to sit within a context of what is best for that organization right now and what is going to be best for that organization in the future. So, thinking a little bit longer term. By longer term, I mean a couple of years. So, there are many, many, many chiefs of staff. I mean, so some chief of staff are essentially a chief operating officer. Some chief of staff, people may have heard the term founders associate. So people who work really closely with a founder who might be relatively early in their career, but have, of course, sort of, a level of potential, grit, those sort of qualities, etc. I personally was a chief of staff to a CEO, founder CEO on a leadership team at a leadership team level. So the key thing was really having discussions about how are we shaping and scoping and defining this role, and you have to do that within the context of what the leadership team actually is. If the leadership team is one sole founder and no one else, you're essentially a co-pilot and you're going to be doing a whole lot of things. If you've got five co-founders and, a massive sort of, suite of vice presidents and every title in between, that role may by necessity have to be a little bit narrower. Maybe you've got a niche skill set, whether it's, financial modeling or something that you can drive innovation on. So you really do need to define it really tightly. The way I've often liked to work in this role is thinking about the founder complementing them. A lot of, I have an arts background. A lot of the people that I've worked with really closely often have had more of an engineering background. So kind of finding someone that you can complement, and kind of also, I think it can be really great when you both like doing things that the other person doesn't necessarily
Mm.
want to do as much. So that you've always got that coverage and really sort of how can I multiply the impact of this principle? So it's slightly different to say a business operations role that is a little bit broader because you are essentially thinking, what is the office of the CEO? How does that interact with the rest of the leadership team? How can I be fair to all the executives and think about the best interests of the company, but while amplifying that founder's ability to execute so that when we bring the strategy together, we're all sort of, working on the best things that drive the organization forward. There are things that a founder can delegate, but you have to be really mindful and careful about what exactly you're delegating. So I think the ability to take as much off a founder's plate as appropriate, because sometimes it is right that, the founder's the one who delivers that big
Mm.
sort of, groundbreaking message about the direction of the business. So there are lots of books on this. The Harvard Business Review. I think a lot of people kind of copy and paste what the Harvard Business review description is and put it in job specs. You wouldn't do that, Chris, I know. And yeah, there are, fascinating books about, I think there's one, it's called something like Second in Command or something like that.
Mm.
I could be wrong. But there are all sorts of different models. But also the other critical thing about the role is there is a personality and personal fit element to it, much more so than if you were doing sort of a broader business ops or strategy role. Like you kind of have to be in the trenches with this person all the time, whether it's sunny, whether it's raining, whether there's a thunderstorm, and finding someone where they naturally want to kind of give that work to someone and you kind of naturally want to work with them. And that's really critical as well.
Yeah, so I think one thing I take from that is it's okay to have like a chief of staff really tailored to your needs because it's a little bit different to maybe ML and I know you can say that about any role, but with ML engineering, it's a little bit more, everybody's kind of in one lane. So and I guess, do you one thing I admire about you, as I say, is your kind of understanding of technical markets and translating that into the operations side. But do you think that technical understanding of, say, a technology like NLP is essential for a chief of staff? And is it kind of a line where you would expect, a chief of staff to have technical knowledge, I guess?
Super inter- Super interesting question again. So so I'd done some technical delivery at a startup that was AI focused before going into the role. So that helps with an empathy for how, technical folks may be going about solving a particular problem or anticipating the types of challenges that they're going to have. It's probably more common now that people would have had exposure to that type of work. But when I started, that was not common at all. So while I do think if you get to grips with the technology, if you build relationships with the technical team, if you also have the humility to see it from their perspective and not your perspective, I think you can save a lot of time
Mm.
by learning their language around, how they're planning things, why things are iterative, why you can't necessarily get a black and white answer about what's going to happen on Tuesday. Um, but if you're meeting someone great who doesn't have that experience, because to be fair, there haven't been sort of tons and tons of those opportunities. And if you just didn't know anybody working in that space, maybe you didn't go into that space if you didn't get the context around it. So I think the critical thing really above all else is a willingness to learn and a willingness to not assume, like, just because you may have sort of, a strategy background or done some really compelling projects for high profile clients, that doesn't mean that's automatically going to translate as is into a more agile sort of scale up type environment, startup environment. And that also means that, AI, which is such an incredibly fast moving field, it's really critical that you're just willing to learn
Mm.
and willing to be resilient, and also that comfort level with uncertainty. And then sort of that can translate into somebody kind of continually building the technical awareness, I would say, to, be effective with a really broad range of stakeholders. But yeah, ask me this question in 10 years and I'll probably say it's absolutely critical because more people probably should have that kind of knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's really well put and segues nicely into the next question around uncertainty and, are we doing enough to, safely develop AI and its future powers? DeepSeek this week's been the newest buzzword in AI, but what are your thoughts on kind of responsible AI development at the moment?
Well, with responsible AI development, it's really critical to always have your principles in mind, whether those principles are around um, sort of explainability of, say, data sets or a particular model, if they're around bias, if it's around sort of the quality of the use cases that you're selecting, if it's around sort of, what clients do I choose to work with as someone who lives in a liberal democracy, for example. So I think you have to be led by certain principles and not just kind of react all the time and go with the wind. But at the same time, you have to look about at the external environment and see, is there a breakthrough that means everything that I had assumed has now been flipped on its head? And then you have to really come together and look at that. I think when you're thinking about responsibly applying a technology, particularly an incredibly powerful one like AI, machine learning, there's a broad pool of experts who are part of that journey. There are some technical things that you can do to, improve the safety of models, improve the performance of different models. Um, but at the same time, that's operating within legal frameworks, regulatory environment. There might be academics who are independent. You might have a really robust view and challenge on what's being built. So not being afraid to essentially not have all the answers and keep these open dialogues with stakeholders, and also be proactive about looking for stakeholders who can guide and have an interesting perspective on that before you need them and before you have a crisis, is really important. So I am aware, I know a lot of people, a lot of technologists who have done a lot for a really, really long period of time. I think the challenge is, how do we, when we've got a world filled with, when we've got 9 billion people, how do we make this technology now work for the best, as many people as we possibly can. And also considering the nuances that there are about what that means in all sorts of different companies as we're trying to scale globally.
Yes, and I guess that's gonna be a continuing open question. I suppose there's no right answer to that at the moment. But moving on to kind of your expertise and background around strategy and operations, I think a lot of founders might find this useful. As you've already said, a lot of them can come from a technical ML engineering background or really technical backgrounds, and it might be the first time they're implementing their own, I guess, AI strategy. What's a good AI strategy to you, and how how can you ensure proper execution of that strategy?
Yeah, a good AI strategy really sits within the context of a business strategy. So it's not really AI for AI's sake necessarily. It's, what as an organization are you trying to achieve? What problems are you trying to solve? Who are you trying to solve them for? Can you evidence that this is a high value problem that people actually want solving? So making sure that AI is essentially used effectively as a tool to solve a problem, and that it effectively engages whoever's using it, whoever's buying it, and is responsible. I think the other critical thing, AI is so connected to the data that these models ingest. So within that, also thinking about the quality of the data that you can find. Can you find the right volume of data to even apply AI in this case? Sometimes I've had people ask me, how do I use AI? And I've said, well, have you tried SQL? Which will probably just solve your problem. Have you? We always talk about, not wanting to use sort of siloed Excel spreadsheets, but if you have literally 5 data points, you do not need you do not need to spend money on a model that's not going to work, because it's going to, be overfitting.
Mm.
So yeah, that, just that mindfulness and proportionality about how AI should be applied and the correct problems, the data involved, the level of computing power required. Also, what are the challenges with potentially maintaining this model if you need to deploy it? So is the model going to degrade over time, which they definitely have a tendency to if you're not putting the resource behind or the effort into model maintenance. Also, those questions around explainability, particularly if you're working on the B2B side or B2G side, that the clients will inevitably require that you explain the output, what you're doing. So you need to have a strong answer to that. And also, given how quickly the field moves, it can be worth having sort of deep experts in areas such as NLP, computer vision, etc., and just really staying ahead of the curve and what are the latest developments, what's the latest research in this sector, so that where possible you can use sort of state of the art models, state of the art techniques, and really hopefully give yourself a really strong advantage. But the magic really is in, have you set up the problem to begin with, and all the way through, are you actually solving the right problem?
Mm. Interesting. And in terms of the next point, I know we've seen a real life example of that this week in terms of how the market's moved and potentially been flipped on its head a little bit. In terms of refining strategy, but then kind of as you put to me in the past, using a data driven approach to refine the strategy. Why is that so important for achieving success?
So with a field like artificial intelligence that is really fast moving, it's really critical to test your assumptions in the market, in the environment. So, if you have a strategy and you feel, and this is specifically for earlier stage businesses, startups, scale ups, if you say in January, this is exactly what I'm going to do for the next 18 months. I mean, look at the last 18 months we've had. Your strategy will have just been turned upside down lots and lots of times. So rather than kind of investing a lot of time in something that's inevitably going to change and challenge you and, wasting that money, wasting that time, it's really about having your vision, your mission, your principles, and you've got a hypothesis about what the problem is, what your, whether it's customers, users, clients, whoever, what those people want and need, and how you can solve that problem. You need to go out and test it and see, does this actually have any traction? Is there any real evidence that, this is solving a challenge? Is this technically feasible? Maybe it was on a plan, but actually you're finding that, particularly if you're working in some domains like, healthcare, whether there's a lot of deep expertise needed, is this something where I can actually use AI to solve this problem as is, or do I potentially even need like a little bit of consulting support in order to solve the particular problem, which a lot of companies do use some kind of managed service, human in the loop element to address things as well.
Cool. And yes, moving on to the execution piece, having the right people is obviously key to executing the right strategy. But you've, as you said at the start, you've kind of come from an arts background, which people might not necessarily associate with a chief staff position or technical role, but it's worked really well. Um, why is it important to have people from different backgrounds and attracting the right people so critical for success?
Yeah, one of the things I love about AI is in the field that we're in, when you're working with really high impact technology to solve really, really big problems, or to be part of solving really, really big problems, you just need so many different skill sets. So you obviously do need robust technical skill sets and people who are, able to code really, really well, fantastic engineers of many, many different types of engineers. You need data security experts, privacy experts, whether those people are formally sort of full time in your organization or you're working with, people on more of a consulting basis. Um, but also, you know, we currently do have a narrative where there is a lot of fear around AI, what it can do, what its potential is, and that narrative is evolving every day. But fear is really, really quite dominant in terms of what I'm hearing people mention. If I had a penny for every time I'd been asked about killer robots, I would never need to work again. Um, So how do you engage people and also tell a story around AI? So from a commercial perspective, as you're engaging clients and users, and for some organizations, this may be either the first time they've invested heavily in AI, or maybe the most significant investment they've made, or they may well for the first time have AI be a really central critical part of their strategy. So you do need a range of different skills to construct that story, tell that story, even telling the story around, how certain models are performing, because sometimes it's not always explicitly intuitive how a model has addressed the problem that you have. So that
Mm.
level of translation, also sort of managing projects, driving accountability. There are all sorts of skills that are non-technical skills that are a really big piece of the puzzle, particularly when you've got clients and you're also working on use cases that are high impact, that a lot of people might intuitively have an opinion on, even if they've not sort of been close to that particular domain as well.
Yeah, super interesting. I think that very well put. Again, okay. In terms of responsible development, again, specifically related to founders and you know, I think seeing in the market around kind of US versus EU development, it kind of, I think the EU sometimes takes an unfair bashing because there's lots of great startups in London and particularly Paris that we spoke about in the past, but how do you think an org or particularly a startup founder can balance a need to develop responsibly for I guess our future and then not falling behind or getting FOMO in the startup community?
Yeah. So is this about regulation, Chris? That's kind of what I'm sensing. So yeah, obviously in the EU there is a lot of regulation. We've had the EU AI Act. AI regulation is really interesting because it cuts across many different types of regulation. So it's not like there's only one place you'd go to learn about AI regulation. And then in the US, at a federal level, of course, there's a lot more of a lean towards deregulation. But then you do have certain states like California, where, of course, there's so much great AI development there that's introducing, a lot of bills around deepfakes and creators' rights and things like that. And potentially we'll see more of that too. So so it is I think for organizations, particularly smaller, earlier stage ones where there's only so many people you can hire, there's only so many consultants you can pay for. Um, but obviously there are some exceptions to that. There are some very, very well funded companies, as we know. Um, but yeah, it's really critical if you're operating in a regulatory environment. You have to do the best to understand what the regulations are, what the most serious considerations are for you. That there probably are ways that you can get some external support if you just need someone to help you understand and break down. Okay, what are the key top 5 things that I need to know, and embed those processes and systems into your business so you can have that comfort that you've covered those things. And then also that engagement. So I think it is healthy to explain what technology is being built, what impact it has, how it helps to solve societal problems as well. So that as people are, defining the environment that we're in, they're doing that with the knowledge of how innovation is actually working, and also the potential of what we can build as well. Um, Obviously, if you have fewer constraints around you, you probably can more quickly get some technologies and very, very powerful technologies to market. But I think an environment where there are very, very few safeguards, I think that's not ideal either. So it's about striking the right balance. And also, a lot of organizations, a lot of US companies will want to expand into Europe. A lot of European companies would want to expand to the US and other markets. So being cognizant of the full landscape and environment that you're in and taking into account sort of how that affects your business is really key. And it can be really complicated. So the most important thing is get help if you're not sure. But whatever environment you're in, you have to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think you raised an interesting point. It certainly comes across can be a quite complex topic, I guess. And what just taking it back a bit, what point do you think hiring someone like you, a chief of staff, would be a good point for maybe a founder who's very technical? You know, would you advise getting maybe fractional help initially, and at what point? And at what point does a full-time chief of staff, do you think, becomes relevant? And I think it's obviously going to be different case to case, but in your experience, when is when can the biggest impact be made?
Yeah, super interesting question. So I've seen some founders hire a chief of staff within their first 10 hires before they'd hire, say, a chief operating officer, if there was no chief operating officer as a co-founder. I've seen some founders go and hire a chief of staff when they're 200 people in for the first time. Um, but basically hire a chief of staff before everyone is telling you, why don't you have a chief of staff? Well, that
Okay.
that probably is the best point. I think at the point at which you don't have capacity to think about the business in the way that you want to, fine, you'll never have the time to do everything that you want to do. But if you're really sort of so overwhelmed with, approving everything, having to do absolutely every action that the board or a particular stakeholder has requested, having to prepare every, meeting opportunity for a company. And if you're looking back and saying, over the last 3 months, I've literally basically done very little of what I wanted to do, and I don't even have the headspace to think about what the next 3 months should look like. That's a really critical point. Whether you do go down a chief operating officer route, or there are all sorts of different titles you can have, I think that's the time when you really do need somebody in, and that can happen at all sorts of different different times. I would say if you are going to have a chief of staff, I mean, before you're raising your really maybe a big round, it would be probably maybe even the year before, to get someone, used to the business, build relationships with the team. And of course, that's if you're hiring externally. You may well find someone internal who, you can shape a role with. So that when it comes to, fundraising, critical milestones, new market expansion, you've got someone there to take the lift. And you've also got someone who can say, hey, why are we doing this? Or can we do this another way? Or hang on a second, like, you know, everyone's asking for your time. Like, are you happy with that? Like, how can we bring that back so you can also focus on a few other things that are really critical as well?
Cool. And yeah, just final question on responsible development. I think you put this really well to me in the past, and keen to share it. Where responsible development in a startup is not strictly tied to monetization, and um, at least initially, how what steps can people take to they themselves buy into responsible AI development, but also how can you link it to, I guess, future monetization?
Yeah, so responsible AI development is really critical. In most organizations, I would expect the team that's joined the organization will have really high expectations of the standards in that startup. They've joined because they believe in a founder, they believe in a mission, they believe in a problem space. So and hopefully that space is responsible. And then also clients, again, a lot of startups, need clients who can have the budgets to be able to use them, and to take that chance on working with a really innovative technology, and then scaling that long term. So if you're trying to attract FTSE 100 clients, or some of the most prestigious logos out there, they will really care if their suppliers are responsible. And I think the consequences of having scandals around not being responsible can follow organizations for an incredibly long time. And it can also impact your potential future ability to win work. So, if you've just got your sort of massive, let's say it's one of the largest companies in the US is your client. That's a golden opportunity. You want that to go well. You don't want them to kind of fire you because you missed out on responsibility and then you don't get that referral going forward to build your pipeline. So not just in terms of sort of team engagement and morale, but really there is, even if people don't see it as short-term pain, there's a long-term pain that comes with not being responsible.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I couldn't agree more with that one in terms of long-term approach. Okay, and just moving on to the final part of the podcast today, you're probably the most relevant for any founder. Your experience in fundraising, super unique background and experience in the space. Where should a founder start with fundraising, and how would you advise anyone kind of taking that on in today's ever-changing market?
Good luck. Um, no, nobody needs luck. So the most important thing is, what am I raising and why? And really being disciplined about having that clear why the entire time through, and also having that why once you've raised the money. So you're actually using the funds for what, you've gone through all that effort for. Some rounds can be incredibly easy, some rounds can be incredibly hard. So you need to also reflect considerably on the market timing. If you try to raise within a downturn, that might just take a lot longer. Or it might just be a lot harder because, inevitably the scrutiny might be higher. Investors, we will always say that even in a downturn for a high performing company, they're willing to still deploy capital. And of course, that knowledge that investors are partners in this, they've got capital that they need to deploy. So they are looking for opportunities. So kind of having that positive mindset around raising is really critical. Also, sort of understanding the actual process and the language of venture capital. There are some great books on this, like Venture Deals, I think by Brad, don't want to get his last name wrong. But Venture Deals, it's definitely in all quality bookstores, which lays out, things like, what is a convertible loan note? What is it like to raise more at a sort of Series A stage? What sort of additional work do you need to do to raise a Series B and beyond? So you need sort of enhanced legal due diligence, enhanced due diligence at all their levels, really. Um, you know, what are the typical terms that you can expect to see for different types of deals? How long do these deals typically take? So to know the language and the process, will really help you sort of feel and also look like you know what you're doing, even if it's maybe the first couple of times you've gone out to raise. And to really take it seriously and make sure that you're comfortable with the deal, because the long-term implications of that are really big. To bring on sort of a new partner, to potentially, give up some equity in your business, or if you've taken on some debt, you have to repay the interest. So it's serious. So I think sometimes, when it comes to things like salary negotiations, I don't know if you ever saw those magazines when you were a teenager that said, "Oh, well, you can only sort of negotiate in this one particular area or this other particular area," which I think is terrible advice. Just to throw that in. But when you look at these really big deals for a company, and also if we're being really serious, a company that could potentially generate a lot of wealth and a lot of
Mm,
massive impact in an organization, think long term. And I'd say, don't give everything up in the first round and then come to regret it all the way through the lifetime of your company and be demotivated. And you really need to be sure, like, am I comfortable with this deal? Am I raising the right thing? Should it be a convertible loan note? Because I don't want to price my round right now. Like, should
Mm.
it be equity? Should it be debt? Debt usually follows raising equity. So think about the sequencing, what you're doing, and also coming up with a story and being crystal clear about who is actually doing the work of raising. It might not be everybody in your leadership team. It might just be you supported by, one person on your board. Everybody helps, but you need ownership and who's leading this.
I think that, that's very clearly explained. So thank you. And I think your experience specifically raising in the UK market and your background there. What do you think some of the key challenges would be there in terms of that you specifically faced for fundraising, but also if you were to translate that to the vibe of raising in 2025, do you think those challenges would hold up well to today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think at the moment there is obviously a huge desire for AI investment. Um, it's probably not unreasonable to think that there may be some more diversification from that in future years. So a lot of organizations feel that they have to be able to make it really clear how AI is adding value or, increasing the efficiency of particular tools for end users, clients, etc. So AI does feel like it's still a really, really strong theme. Um, a strong theme at the moment. One of the key things in the UK is there probably is much less of a growth at all costs attitude. So um, having some evidence, probably even at relatively early stages, that there is some path to profitability, or you could break even if you wanted to, within a couple of years. That's more critical, sort of more I's and more T's dotted. And that's not to say that there isn't probably that movement in the US to some degree, but I think you will see more organizations where more investors where the focus really is sort of scaling unprofitably, incredibly quickly. So so that appears to be the one of the critical differences.
Cool. And what would you say the when you raised was actually your biggest challenge during fundraising?
One of the biggest challenges was uh, fundraising is a full-time job. Being a chief of staff is a full-time job. Comms is there are just a lot of full-time jobs. So probably time management, prioritization. You have to be super, super focused. You need a lot of stamina, and really to be focused on all sorts of things, whether it's financial things, aspects of the story, really knowing your customers in depth, also engaging the wider leadership team on things that, a lot of investors want to meet customers, want to meet, you know, the person leading a particular team, and having to do that against the backdrop of having to do other work because the business doesn't stop, because it can't stop. Some of the biggest challenges fundraising are really the time management, because you have to also be working with the business and clients and all sorts of things at the same time. And you have to build a really, really clear picture of where the business is at, where the business is going over a very long time horizon, and have that tight, compelling story and all the data points to back it up. So that's just a lot of work. I know that people say there are AI tools that can do this, but sometimes there's a level of nuance and sophistication that I don't think I'd be comfortable just asking a tool exactly to give me the answer. Um, so that was one of the biggest challenges. In terms of the actual round, I think particularly if there are lots of different approaches you can take, it's sometimes just picking what is the right area to focus on. I think for certain businesses, it might be completely obvious what the right thing to do is. I think I've worked in organizations that had more complexity in terms of multiple business lines, operating in multiple geographies. So essentially, what do you lead with? That's a really critical thing. Um, also, another key area would be, yeah, how do you communicate the progress of the round to the wider business? It's something that people are always fascinated by. I think fundraising can feel a little bit mysterious until you start doing it.
Mm.
And it can feel very like, there are very dramatic consequences, which is fair, that can be. So yeah, how to manage that as well. This wasn't my experience. I think for some organizations, it may be challenging to access the networks in order to, help get deals over the line. So, as much as people can do to, get the support of people who maybe in that case, maybe you get an advisor who has raised before, who's willing to be really generous and help navigate, that new process.
Yes, it's an interesting point, and I guess, if you're raising for the first time, you don't know what you don't know. What just changing the perspective a little bit to maybe what an investor's prioritizing and, maybe some of the nuance you picked up as you've done it twice before. What do you think investors are prioritizing apart from the obvious, when they're looking at founders and what exactly you think they're looking for?
Yeah, it can differ by stage. So typically, the earlier stage and the fewer data points you can expect, it typically is more about that founder and sort of why they would be successful in that particular space, why they are the best person to solve that particular challenge. Recognizing that things can change all the time. So, things like, um, perceiving someone to have, the tenacity, the grit, etc., to stick with it and be really passionate about things when they get incredibly difficult, which, as we know, most startups, scale ups, don't end up kind of making it. So there's a really, really high risk of that. The other thing, so at later stages, once you start to get more evidence around, having, a more robust, scalable product, having, customers, users, growth is really, really critical. Um, yeah, without that, I mean, you want to be growing much quicker than, much, much larger companies because that really is your differentiator. You want to be in a large growing market, and then you want to be gaining traction and having evidence that you've got good traction, and then eventually that you have product market fit. Um, sometimes it's key that you're sort of, you're not burning too much cash because sometimes that can be an indication that you've not quite reached product market fit or not kind of got the go to market strategy in the optimal place just yet. But of course, there inevitably is some just spending more than you're making that's needed for growth and innovation and product development as well, particularly if you're in sort of high cost areas such as London, Bay Area, New York, Paris, etc. And then really, as an organization is sort of scaling beyond Series B, Series C, it's really sort of the product should be there. It's what's now the go-to-market strategy to, scale incredibly quickly, but more efficiently than you have in the past. So, whether it's sort of working with partners who can resell software or sometimes people want to work with very large organizations that already work with all the FTSE 100 companies, and then you could just sort of sell it through that distribution channel. So yeah, that long-term potential and traction and sort of also retaining customers and people coming back again and again and again for years and years and years, having that long lifetime value to show evidence that essentially people really want what you're building.
Well put again. I think, yeah, just showing that evidence-based approach, is timeless really, isn't it? So, thank you so much, Wenya. I think you've shared some excellent points today. Really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and your time. So thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much again for having me, Chris.
You're welcome.